Frontline workers often see things differently than policymakers. They are, after all, up close and personal with issues that can be remote for others. Dr. Najma Ahmed is a trauma surgeon at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. Her work there prompted her to become an activist on gun control and helped found the advocacy group Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns. Dr. Najma Ahmed joins us now on why she felt she needed to take a stand, and we are delighted to welcome you to TVO tonight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns. How big is this group?
It's a national organization of doctors and healthcare professionals spanning the entire country. We've got doctors and healthcare professionals in all provinces, and our position statement has been endorsed by a number of national and provincial level bodies.
What's your mission?
Our mission is to educate the public, to bring into the public sphere this discourse related to the increase in harm, injury, and death that we are witnessing from guns, and to get the attention of our policymakers to ensure that legislation is enacted to increase the safety of our public.
Well, to that end, some of them are paying attention because Bill C-71 is the federal government's attempt to amend various laws and regulations around firearms. It's at second reading in the Senate right now, and here are some of the 411 on that. It's a more extensive background check from the current 5 years to looking at an applicant's entire life history. Other changes include retailers who have to keep records of all firearm sales and inventory for 20 years, and gun owners will have to get authorization to transport their firearms anywhere except to a gun range. Those are some of the aspects of C-71. What do you think about it?
We think this is an important first step, an important step towards increased scrutiny about who can own guns and how they're regulated in our society. So we think it's an important first step and certainly support Bill C-71.
But only a first step, you think?
We think so, yes.
What's step 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on?
Well, certainly the world's literature does show that Canada's not doing well. You know, compared to our peer nations, our gun fatality rate is much higher compared to countries like the UK, Australia, Netherlands, and Japan. And so we think it's time to look at greater regulations related to semi-automatic firearms and high-velocity assault-type, military-type weapons, which can be purchased in Canada. So we'd like to see a ban on those weapons and greater scrutiny and a ban on handguns as well.
We tend to look south, though, when we compare, and when you look south, I mean, come on, we're doing way better.
Yeah, when we look south, our gun fatality rate is probably 5 to 6 times less than the U.S. And I think Canadians are somewhat passive about this for that reason. We feel like, you know, it's not like living in Chicago or New York or LA, but compared to our peer nations, the economically developed democracies of the world, we have work to do.
Dr. Ahmed, most doctors I know are very content to spend whatever time they spend in the medical profession healing people, treating sickness, and so on. And they don't become kind of social activists for a cause. Why are you?
You know, actually, you're right. We're quite busy in our lives, and we love what we do, and I certainly love what I do, and the doctors that I work with are also very busy and love and enjoy what they do. But if you think about it, doctors have had a long history of advocacy. If you think about campaigns against nicotine and seatbelt, asbestos, safety, physicians have long engaged in the public debate that have made our society safer, and that's why we are engaged in this debate.
And I'm going to draw the inference here that you decided to get involved in this because you work in one of the, you know, more dangerous areas of the city, in a relatively safe city,
yes,
and have seen your share of gunshot wounds.
Yeah, I'm a trauma surgeon at St. Michael's Hospital, and we are one of 3 trauma centers in the city, one of 2 adult trauma centers in the city, and we have witnessed an increase in injury and harm and death from guns, homicide, suicide, intentional and unintentional injuries, and we're alarmed. Physicians across the whole country are alarmed by this trend, and we think it's time to do something about it.
People will remember on the Danforth, a man with a gun walking down the street and just picking people off, and you were working that night.
Yes.
What did you see that night?
Yes, I was on call the night of the Danforth shooting, and what I saw was preventable harm. What I saw is something that should not have happened and maybe did not need to happen. I saw that innocent people and people going about their business in a relatively safe city, as you say, out on a lovely summer evening, came to harm because we have a proliferation of guns in our society that is somewhat unchecked. And there's been a backslide in the laws regulating guns in the last decade or so. It's time to pay attention to that, we think.
Thankfully, it would be an extremely rare occurrence to see gunshot wound victim after gunshot wound, I mean, another and another and another and another come into your OR, right?
Yes, yeah.
Is that what happened that night?
Yeah, that night we had 5 victims, gunshot victims that came in all together, a mass casualty setting. But I have to tell you that, over a weekend, we can see several patients with gunshot wounds. We just don't necessarily see them in a public place, which is the alarming thing.
Did you know as they were coming in what was going on?
It's a good question. So, in the city we call it a code orange, meaning that there's some kind of disaster happening in the city, some kind of catastrophe. It alerts all pre-hospital personnel, paramedics, police, fire, security in the city, and the other hospitals in the city which engage in this sort of mass casualty situation. And I didn't know for some hours, and as a trauma surgeon, the things that go through my head are there other targets in the city? Was there only one shooter? Has the scene been secured? Are there other victims coming? And we didn't know the answer to those questions until well into the early morning of that fateful night.
I'm sort of curious, do you at any point flip on the news and then realize, oh, this is what we're dealing with?
So the other people in the operating room, the nurses, the anesthetists, and lots of people, the comms people in the hospital are keeping track of that, and they keep us up to date about what's happening. As you know now on social media, there's a lot of stuff that's almost immediately available to the police, paramedics, and people like yourself.
But I'm guessing you don't go on Twitter when you're in the middle of patching people up.
No, I wasn't exactly.
You've got to rely on other people to do that.
That's right.
And we're many months after the fact here, so you may not remember this, but how many of the gunshot wound victims that came into your OR were you able to save, and how many expired?
I remember precisely what happened. It's sort of embedded in my brain. It's sort of an indelible memory. 5 patients came to our hospital. All 5 survived. 3 of them had very serious injuries. 2 young ladies expired, one at the scene, and a 10-year-old girl was pronounced dead at the hospital for sick children in the operating room.
I'm guessing that you don't forget.
One does not forget, no. And these people stay, the patients and their families stay in our lives. So people have this impression when you see the ambulances drive up to the trauma bay and the doors close, that for them that's kind of like, well, that's over. But for the families, for the doctors, for the caring team, for the patients, it changes their life forever. It becomes a chronic illness.
Well, in spite of the good work that you believe you are doing, not everybody is thrilled with what you are doing, I have to say. There's a group called the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, and we want to show a little snippet here of their executive director, who's in a video. They're releasing this tomorrow. They've allowed us to show it tonight because they understood that we were going to have this conversation. So take a look at the monitor up there, and then we'll come back and chat. Sheldon, please.
The frustration isn't that the doctors were expressing an opinion. Everyone is entitled to that. But that they were using their credentials as doctors to spread misleading and in some cases false information. That's a problem because we have to maintain trust in our doctors, often for life or death medical decisions. As well, the emergency room or your family doctor's office is no place for politics.
What's your response to that?
Yeah, so that's a little disappointing for us. This is, for us, a public health issue. It, of course, is linked to policy and politics, but for us, this is a public health issue because it bears on the safety and the health of our citizens. The evidence that we have presented is well supported by international level studies in the medical literature. One can debate the veracity of the evidence, but the evidence is clear that a proliferation of guns, increased access to guns, results in higher rates of homicide, suicide, intentional injury, and unintentional injury. That's a matter that's not up for debate, and that is our position. They've
started a hashtag campaign, hashtag stay in your lane. The suggestion being that you are, well, you're getting out of your lane and you're going, beyond what you were trained at medical school to do. How do you react to that? Well, that
hashtag stay in your lane actually was propagated initially by the NRA, and the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights has taken that up as well. Many healthcare professionals and doctors in this country, across the world, and in the US have responded to that by saying, this is absolutely our lane. From this lane, we see the victims of gun injuries. From this lane, we console families. We hold the hands of mothers who have lost their children, of domestic violence victims. So it is our responsibility and our obligations as citizens to inform the public and our policymakers about what we are seeing.
I think one of the things that makes this group uncomfortable, though, is the notion that potentially a law-abiding gun owner could become a patient of yours at some point, and might feel uncomfortable about the fact that someone who was so openly against their organization would be treating them. What do you think about that?
You know, we all take the Hippocratic Oath, and our oath is to provide comfort and a cure to anybody who comes to our doors, whether we agree with them or not. I'll tell you that I have treated people who have very open views that are contrary to mine on many political issues, and we treat them all the same. It is our moral and legal obligation to do so, and I don't know any physician who would change the way that they interact or treat a patient because of something they believe in. That's just something that is not part of the medical profession.
As a self-governing, self-regulating professional, you are under the auspices of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, and there were 70 complaints lodged against you at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. Do you know who lodged those complaints?
Those complaints, I believe, were lodged by people who feel that physicians should not engage in this debate. I think that was spurred on initially by a suggestion by the CCFR that they do so. And certainly they're entitled to their position and they're entitled to their view, and they felt that was an appropriate thing to do. My understanding is that the CPSO has responded by saying that they generally review complaints for clinical care that's been delivered by a physician or highly unprofessional behavior.
So did they toss them out?
My understanding is that they have decided not to review those complaints as they found them to be frivolous and vexatious, but the matter is not completely closed. As you may know, there's a 30-day period in which complainants on both sides could appeal the decision. You
went to Ottawa, right? You testified before a parliamentary committee?
That's right. So in February, I represented our organization at the Senate hearing committee that's studying Bill C-71. And that was quite an interesting experience. We presented our side of the evidence, and I was really impressed that the senators were interested in what we have to say. We got a large number of very fascinating questions and a lot of engagement by our senators. So that was a really fascinating, interesting thing for us to do.
2 days hence, something called a Day of Action. What's going to happen?
Yes, on April the 3rd, on Wednesday, there will be a national day of action across 13 cities in Canada, all the way from St. John's to Vancouver. Small communities, large communities, doctors and healthcare professionals will be holding a day of action, and these things span from large collections of rallies to letter writing campaigns in small local communities to get the attention of the public and our policymakers to deliver the message that healthcare professionals and doctors are concerned and that we feel that policy action is needed.
Let me ask you one last thing, and that is that speak to the legal gun owner in this country who says, all I want to do is take my legally purchased gun, for which I have a firearms certificate, to go to a target range, for example, do some target practice shooting, go home. It's a completely safe environment in which I do it. I'm not a criminal. My gun is, kept in a safe place and it won't get into the hands of a criminal. And yet they feel somehow they're being targeted by you. What would you say to them?
We're not intending to target anybody specifically. We're just wanting to raise public awareness about this issue. We know that year over year, somewhere between 30 and 40 to 50% of legally owned guns get diverted to illegal markets. So there is something there that needs to be attended to. And we do understand that farmers and hunters use these guns as tools, as they should be, and it's part of their life, and we don't feel that we need to engage with those people in a negative way. We respect that. It's part of what they do, and they think it's important for their life and perhaps their livelihood. We are looking at the proliferation of guns, and why would anyone need to own a very lethal weapon that can cause a high degree of injury and harm in a short period of time? That's the kind of question that we want to ask. And why would someone want to have several guns? And perhaps if you're a firearm owner and you shoot at a range, it might be appropriate to store your firearm at that range so it's not out in the public, because these firearms can be stolen or sold in illegal markets or lost track of, despite one's best interests. So we are here only to inform the public good. So our only position is, what can we do to make our society safer? Because it is becoming increasingly unsafe if we look at the trend across the last decades. That's Dr. Najma Ahmed. She is with St. Michael's Hospital and part of the Canadian Doctors
for protection from guns. We thank you for coming into TVO tonight and sharing your views with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.